and we need to be doing that, and we need to be investing thoughtfully, which I don't think means more investment. I think it means more thoughtful investment, and that's the goal and the vision that we would like to see happen in this country.
Without a national transportation policy, or at least a policy that recognizes that intercity passenger rail is something to be favored, that it's a component to a balanced national transportation system here, and that to achieve that, you have to have federal investment and a massive federal-state matching program. Until that happens, Amtrak's still going to be the weak sister. The states where some of them are just coming back now from having deficits for many years, like Illinois here, are gamely trying to support more Amtrak service. Amtrak is going to be getting double the money from Illinois next year as they are this year, going from $12 million to $24 million. They're going to put 4 more frequencies on, 2 more to St. Louis, 1 more to Macomb and Quincy, and another to Champaign and Carbondale, all college towns and good medium-sized cities served. And they're kind of doing it in a vacuum.
The fact that any real development at all has taken place in the face of these ridiculous anti-rail federal policies is a tribute to the rail mode. But what we've seen recently is that some of the relatively limited improvements that have been made in the Midwest corridors have resulted in very strong ridership growth, which gives us the hope that if the federal government can ever figure out how to become a partner in transportation development that is not highways and aviation or local transit, great things are going to happen in the Midwest, and further development is going to happen in California.
Unfortunately, you have some states, California, Oregon, other states that have invested quite a bit of state money to try to improve rail service in those states that can help people who want to take train transportation, that want to ride a train up and down the corridor. Right now, they're prevented from using any kind of federal transportation money from the gas tax to match that state investment. So we should be looking at opportunities to provide more flexibility to those states that want to create high-speed rail or even just incremental improvements to the rail system that could shave 30 minutes, 45 minutes off of a train trip that someone's taking from Portland, Oregon up to Seattle, Washington, for instance. So these are a series of policy suggestions that we've been recommending, and hopefully the crisis that's happening right now around Amtrak in this country, I think it would be a short-sighted solution if we respond to that crisis only by looking at Amtrak and the rail system. This country is a transportation network and a system that runs through the entire country. And I think there are efficiencies to be gained for consumers, for shippers, for communities that are so dependent upon transportation connections. If we can seize the opportunity right now around Amtrak to really make the larger system work better.
But things like that are very difficult to do. And it seems like a no-brainer again. From these tracks that come in from Detroit and from Indianapolis and Cleveland and all those small cities in between, these tracks go right through Union Station. And then they go out on a Metro line. Metro runs trains out on these tracks, and there's a stop right there at O'Hare Airport. It seems like it would be very simple to simply run those trains from Detroit through Union Station and go out to O'Hare and have that immediate link. But unfortunately, there's lots of hurdles. And when I've talked to the people about this, they all say it's a great idea and they need to deal with it. If you talk to the airport, well, that's a rail issue. If you talk to the rail people, well, that's a city issue. If you talk to the city, that's a it just goes around in a circle. That's because we've set up at the federal level and the state levels very distinct silos. So these people aren't talking to each other the way they're supposed to.
Right now, there's no one at the U.S. Department of Transportation whose job it is to look at how do these different modes function together and what are opportunities to improve the coordination between these different modes. That's a crazy thing, not to have anyone at the Department of Transportation doing that. We're not collecting the right data on inner city transportation to really even know how much of the traffic that's in a metropolitan area is from people passing through the metropolitan area versus those who are working in the metropolitan area and living in the metropolitan area. Not only are we doing passengers a disservice, but we're doing our economy, our national economy, a serious disservice by not investing and maintaining the investment that we've already made in this country. It strikes me, if I was the CEO of a major corporation, I would look at my assets here, hundreds of billions of dollars that have been invested by taxpayers, by stockholders, we could call them, into our assets in this country. And how are we managing our assets? Not very well, I would argue. We're not thinking how they connect. We're not thinking how we can maintain and improve those assets. Rather than continuing to look at adding more to it, what is the current system? When we think about intermodal transportation, I've mentioned that there's no one at the U.S. Department of Transportation whose job it is to look at all the pieces in the inner city transportation system. Back in the 1990s, for the first time, Congress did create an Office of Intermodalism at the U.S. Department of Transportation. This happened back in 1998. It was great news when it happened. Since it was created, it has never been adequately funded, and there are only a handful of people who work in that office right now. Even in that office, where there are good people doing good work, they don't have the resources necessary to really look at intermodal transportation. Instead, they're oftentimes working on some specific intermodal projects that might be, how do we fund and create this intermodal facility? But again, no one is charged there with sort of this bigger view of how can intermodalism really work. And I know that just in talking to some of those people, they themselves have been frustrated at the difficulty in sort of moving the institutional giant that is any bureaucratic agency, where there are these stovepipes of modes of, you have FAA and you have FTA and FHWA, many acronyms in transportation. You have all these groups, FRA, they all have different mandates, they all have different missions, they all have different personalities, they all have different funding schemes, and trying to coordinate and pull those together, very difficult job, particularly if you're an office of 2 or 3 people, barely a budget to your name, and it's really not clear the authority that you have to sort of force or coerce these groups to work together that should be working together more easily. And so it's not just a funding change, but it's sort of an institutional change that needs to happen. And I think in some ways institutional changes are more difficult to make happen than economic ones.
They're trying to access, through Amtrak, freight railroads which have very little capacity to be able to make available to run these intercity trains. So the states are doing it, and Amtrak continues to struggle. It is going to take leadership from the federal government, from the Department of Transportation, from the administration, and from Congress in order to bring about the kind of policy change and the kind of massive federal investment to bring intercity trains into this country where I think most of us would want them to be, which is not just an alternative form of transportation, not just a backup system, but as in many cases it ought to be, and it's becoming, a primary way of getting people from point A to point B.
So we need to, as soon as we can, immediately, we need to start working on ways of making our communities more walkable. We need to link our cities together with trains and buses so that people can start to use less oil, to build stronger communities, and we have to start doing it right away. The challenge is, how do we get there? For the last 80 years, we've had incremental policy decisions that have made it very difficult to do buses and trains. We've got an administration right now that has absolutely no interest in dealing with these kinds of problems. What do we do to get over that? And the key to doing this is to start at a very local level. Cities now and state governments are starting to recognize that these challenges that they face. County governments recognize they simply cannot solve their problems with highways alone. Even state governments are recognizing that they can't afford to do this with highways alone.
Inner-city bus transportation in this country, where we have carriers such as Coach and Greyhound that are also restructuring and facing changes and declines in some of their passenger service. Many communities have lost intercity bus service, and so they are left with little choice but perhaps for people to drive. If you're an elderly citizen, that may not be an option that you have, and it's helping to contribute to the isolation of some of our more